The last section of what we do today will be actually looking at an informed consent document. Then you can break down into what's relevant for your practice and what's not, because we have 6 pages of that document. Kind of long, kind of detailed. You probably don't need all of it. But if you can sit and brainstorm with some people about what is relevant for you, my hope is that you'll have a document that then you can take to your local attorney and say, okay, would you please help me with this? And the reason I do this is the type of attorney that generally comes up with these documents charge fees that are about $600 to $650 an hour. Most clinicians are not in an income bracket where that's easy to come up with, especially when someone's going to draft one of these from scratch. It could literally cost you thousands of dollars. So we give you a template, but we really want you to recognize that this is not tailored to you, to your discipline, to your state, to your population you treat. You have to do that part on your own. But we give you that just to get you started. I want to take you through a lot of the issues first so that you can say, oh yeah, that's what this informed consent is about. So when you see it all pulled together and you brainstorm, you've got some background. Make sense for a plan? Okay, good. So we're going to start with the clinical issues. Now, first off, you have to identify the patient need. Whether someone's inpatient, outpatient, transitioning from one to the other, whatever the case is, always start with a needs assessment. Then you have to identify the clinical, the diagnostic, also the setting issues. Who else is in this person's world? Who else is likely to show up and participate in this? Is it reasonable to include them? And what kind of education do they need up front? And what other factors would preempt, complicate, or exclude use of a technology with a client or patient? Notice the word a technology. You want to take one technology at a time. And I want to encourage you to start with video. Keep it simple when you start. There's no need to jump in the deep end of the pool here. So just keep it very simple. Start with a video interface, if that's your primary interest, and then move forward from there. How do you generally organize yourself to do your screening, your intake? Safest way is an in-person assessment. Get a referral from another professional. These are traditional methods. Or are you working with some type of validated online assessment system? I was talking during the lunch break with a gentleman from a hospital system and talking about some of the online assessment services that are currently available. Very sophisticated, validated psychological assessments that can be administered by folks with a little bit of training. That will give you a report and a diagnosis. For the most part, is pretty substantial. Now, when you look at these components one by one, you can see it more specifically. Diagnosis. If somebody is highly anxious, depressed, psychotic, chemically dependent, acting out, they're not good candidates. You may like them, but they're not good candidates. Now, what about the setting? The setting for a difficult patient can make all the difference. Prisons, inpatient units, other treatment facilities provide support. For us, when we're working in a brick and mortar environment, they also provide support for us online. So our job is to identify and resolve any other conflicting barriers that are clinical or administrative. So some of these barriers might include disruptive children. If there are 3 children banging on the door because they're fighting during the hour, then you really can't do your job. See, that has to be handled. Babysitter can be a requirement for you. You can say, I'm sorry, I can't do what you want me to do given these circumstances, and disengage as respectfully, but as firmly as you need to. If somebody needs frequent emergency contact, I know as a private practitioner, which is what I've been most of my life, there's some people I simply didn't take on because they needed agency 24-hour care. So you bring that same criteria for how you want to run your practice. And then you have to be able to articulate whatever evidence-based strategy you're going to be using to deal with powerlessness. Sometimes we just can't get into the same kinds of areas with people because they're too sensitive, and the person may opt out. So if you're heading down a path, for example, with, let's say, a parent who's divorcing and there are child custody issues at play, they can get volatile. If you say the wrong thing and the person you're dealing with grabs those kids and brings them over state lines so that the state can't get at them, you may have been remiss to even take this person on and get into this volatile issue. If you get into domestic violence, self-mutilation, and premature termination, those are the really big issues. You want to make sure that you've got the safety net to deal with that. Other strategies dealing with firearms. How do you deal with firearms in the home when you've got a brick and mortar practice? Let's say you've got somebody who's suicidal and they have a gun rack at home and it's filled with guns and shotguns. What do you do?
Talk with collateral, call law enforcement.
You talk with collateral people, okay.
Get those firearms secured.
Get the firearms secured. The person might voluntarily decide that they're going to give the firearms to their brother. But you have to negotiate that with them. Could I count on you doing that today? When it's done, would you please send me a message or call me? Let me know that's done so I can sleep tonight. If they refuse to do that, can they put a gun lock on that firearm so they don't impulsively reach for that? Can they let somebody else have the key for that? You have to understand your population and what their specific needs are. That's a protocol. Write it out. What about chemically dependent adult with disruptive children? Probably not a good idea to let those kids really irritate that adult. Disengage as respectfully and as slowly as you need to, but don't take them into more volatile areas. Doesn't make sense, right? You're supposed to be calming things down, not agitating people more. And if those kids are uncontrolled, then that becomes a priority. Because what we don't want is for somebody to be agitated in a session. We stop working with them, and those kids are going to have to deal with this parent who's angry and abusive and intoxicated. Now, we do need to deal with the technology side if we're practicing independently. If you work in a hospital environment, an agency environment, and there's an IT person, they will introduce the people to the technology. We need to make sure the person understands their technology. They may or may not be able to do that. So you have to assess their skills. If they're not experienced or proficient enough, you need to train them. You could have an admin do that. Do a tech check. Hey, my admin's going to call you tomorrow and just kind of help you get set up, make sure that everything's working on your end. Because what you don't want to do is start billing for time where you're fussing around with technology for the first 45 minutes and you get 5 minutes of actual treatment time, right? It's just not honest to do that. So you want to have that handled. You can either do it yourself or have somebody else do it. Now, a lot of these systems these days that are on the internet will do a lot of that for you. You don't have to be fussing with it. You'll buy a seat with them and they will have IT people that handle a lot of that for you. But if you're back to starting with very simple technology, then you have to do more work on your end. And then the backup plan we talked about. Telephone, landlines are always best, right? Because they're safer. But nowadays, cell phones are recognized as being HIPAA compliant, so you're generally okay there. Once your treatment has begun, you have to be adaptable. Rigidity doesn't get rewarded in the technology world. So you have to be flexible, keep your cool, and just keep moving forward. Practice doing things that break. How do you recoup from this? How do you recoup from that? How do you keep your cool? That is really the trick. For example, your patient shows up in a different room than you had the tech check-in with. This has happened to me, actually, where, well, we practiced several times in this environment. What on earth are you thinking now coming to another environment and just calling in like nothing is different? Well, you can't say that to a client, right? But now how do we adapt? Because they're not likely to go to the other location. So you've got to do your tech check over again. Can you bill for that time? No. How do you preempt this? You talk about it in your informed consent and you let them know. Don't be changing environments on me. We're doing a tech check to make sure everything's okay where you are. And that can involve the lighting, can involve lots of different things that can change from one place to the other. Now, you have to come up with an agreement with your client that you'll be talking about things that you might not necessarily talk about in person, and get permission to do that. You might find me asking you more questions than I would if you were in the same room with me, because I can't tell what all of you is doing. I can only tell what your face is doing, because I only see your face. So please bear with me. And if you get that agreement up front, then you can pull back on that later on. You can say, remember when I told you that I'd have to be asking you a lot of what might seem to be ridiculous questions? Please bear with me, because I really can't see you and I need to know something before I go on. Give yourself permission up front in your informed consent process to ask ridiculous questions, or what might seem ridiculous to them. Now, when they start dealing with innuendo, and this is a diagnostic issue too, some people will hang out with the innuendo and the double entendre. That always gets tricky, how you manage that, but you can track it. And if it seems to be increasing or it seems to be detrimental to the work, you can address it. You know, just be right up front about it. You know, I'm not really sure what you're saying to me, and I find that this is happening a lot. So I'm wondering what's going on underneath that. You can get at it clinically as respectfully as you can. Other things to be mindful of, what are their questions? What are their concerns? Are they concerned about their privacy being violated? The number one issue that people are concerned about is that there's a recording and that it's going to end up on YouTube. Or for older people, that'll end up on TV. In their heads, they're thinking, oh, my family's going to see this, right? So you can put their minds at ease right away. Let them know, I will not be recording this, and I ask that you don't record it either. If you're thinking about recording it, let's talk about it, okay? So right up front.